Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. So, basically, we see that, Grace is getting closer and closer to fulfilling her plan of wiping out all metahumans, but it's not just going to stop with the city. She plans to go beyond that, because it's like, metahumans are the scourge and everything. So obviously they're trying to find a way to stop her. Well, Nora ends up finding out a way to end up tracking her, and that is the means of the connection that they still have, which is interesting because obviously it makes sense, but it's still kind of interesting to see the fact is even though Nora's not feeling these negative emotions, that because her and Grace are connected, it's bleeding over into herself just because of their minds being connected like that. So even her powers kind of manifesting themselves as like red lightning. The negative force is feeding off of that negative energy, even though it's not coming from Nora. It technically is because it's in her mind, but it's technically coming from Grace's mind. So obviously, Barry and Iris are reluctant to let her keep doing this, but she wants to use this as a means to track down Grace. But obviously they're her parents, and it's like, so we're going to do whatever it takes to keep her away from this trouble and everything. It's interesting too because Nora did something in this episode that's like, has any other speedster done that before? Like, she literally was vibrating at such a fast speed that she basically looked invisible. It's like, I don't think has anyone else done that before? I don't even know if I've ever seen Thawne do that before, but maybe I've never seen that like that. She just kind of it seemed like she just kind of phased back into existence like that. I was like, that's interesting. And so it just seemed like that kind of almost dropped out of nowhere. But maybe that's just kind of like a benefit of like the negative force or something. I don't know. Maybe that has come up before and I'm just being an idiot and just don't remember. Either way, she ends up talking to her parents later on. I mean, to be fair, she kind of still does it on her own. But for her, it's like, I'm an adult, and the fact of the matter is, I'm doing this situation because this is me having thought this through, because the fact of the matter is, time is of the essence, and the fact is, we don't have a lot of time. And the fact is, before now, I would have just jumped at head first in any situation, but because of you guys, because of our parents, it's like, I've learned to kind of take things a little slower, to kind of see things differently, and it's like the fact of the matter is this is what it takes to be a hero. Like, I know there might be consequences, but I'm willing to take that chance if it means we're able to stop this to save so many lives. It's like, rather than kind of standing in my way, I'd rather you guys be there with me. And ultimately Iris and Barry do side with her because they like, at the end of the day, we raised you and wanted you to be a great hero, and so how can we kind of demonize you for doing that in moments like this, stepping up to be a hero? It is kind of interesting how a lot of stuff ends up coming full circle in certain regards, because like to keep Nora's lightning in check and stuff, when she's connecting with Grace's mind, they end up using the same, a modified version of the thing they captured Reverse Flash, or rather Eobard, back in season 1. But then there's the whole thing of like, oh yeah, like, it was actually a mirage because the real Eobard was there disguised as Wells in the wheelchair. And it's like, and then you have Ralph being like, man, Eobard has plans upon plans, which specifically his plans have plans, that type of thing. And which is like, that plays a big role too, especially considering, I'll finish up my current thoughts and I'll kind of circle back to that. I thought it was kind of interesting, like the whole Nora and Grace thing. It was interesting, like a conversation she had of like, the fact of the matter is like the time she's from, where it's like metahumans are running rampant, and the fact is they tear apart families, like they tore apart hers. I guess because obviously like the future is one less hero, and doesn't have, like, Earth 1 at the very least doesn't have a Flash potentially. So obviously Nora kind of filled that role for a little bit, but we still don't know if there's any other speedsters that took up that mantle after Barry was gone, like whether it be Wally, or did Jay come from Earth 3 or Jesse from Earth 2 to kind of fill on that role, like what the hero status is like in 2049 across the board. That's kind of Barry's territory, but like what about the rest of Team Flash? That's something that's never really 100% tackled. So But I guess for her, it's just a situation of like what happened to her family. It doesn't matter, even if there's heroes saving the day. Those heroes are still metahumans, so it doesn't matter and it's even something Nora said I thought was kind of fascinating. It's like, even at this state, you're still that little girl I met who is so angry, and you've been carrying that around all these years. And so for her, it's like that anger she has as a kid has just stayed with her all these years, and it's just grown, and that's what she's harboring onto. And Nora's like, I'm not going to let that, control me. The fact of the matter is you're going to have to carry that on your own. The fact is that she's doing things her own way, because I think it's kind of showing that, I think it's supposed to represent the fact is that Grace is kind of stuck in her own way, stuck in her own hatred, and Nora, who's grown through everything that she's been through over the course of this season, can disconnect herself and not be controlled by, her anger, that she's got herself kind of calm, cool, and collected, that she has control in this situation. So I thought that was just kind of a neat situation. But kind of circling off to something else, it's the whole situation with Ralph, and I thought that's kind of fascinating. Ralph is trying to figure out this whole time travel thing. He feels like there's definitely something going on with Thawne's plan, and it's like, oh, there's got to be something here. And he brings up some interesting points. It's like, okay, so obviously we're in this new timeline that was created because Nora came back in time and changed things. Obviously, the original cicada isn't the original cicada. It's actually Orland. But at some point in the future, Gracie woke up and became the new cicada. She comes back into the past and kills her uncle with his own dagger. But it brings up many different questions. If she only has the dagger here in the future because she took it from Orland to kill him with it, what was she killing metahumans in the future with? And then the same thing about what happens to those metahumans that were killed by Orland? Like, do they just come back to life or what? And then the biggest question is, what happened in a timeline where Grace didn't kill Orland? Because the original timeline that she's from, the original future she's from, she didn't kill her uncle. It's kind of what that whole conversation's implying, that she's only killed him now by coming back to the past and doing it because he changed, because things changed. Because the Orland that's in her head right now is the uncle that she grew up with, like the one that was Cicada. Obviously, the uncle she killed is the one who kind of went back to being the original Orland before he became Cicada, trying to look after her, not being so consumed by revenge, Which those are some very fascinating questions that Ralph asked, but obviously they're so focused on going after Cicada, they don't really have time to really think about that type of stuff. You have Sherlock meeting up with Renee, kind of tracking her down and everything, and trying to keep her safe. Luckily, the team shows up in time, but because of Grace's connection with Nora, she can see Nora on her way, so it's like, oh, she knew to expect them and was able to get out of there in time. And it's so interesting because obviously you have Sherlock trying to look after her. She's like, I wanted to tell you about the whole me being a metahuman thing, but she was kind of scared. And for him, it's like, no matter what you do, no matter what happens, the fact is I'm not going to look at you any differently, which is kind of sweet. But then there's also that part of your brain that goes, it is kind of messed up because let's not forget he dated Renee's from different Earths, so it kind of almost takes away from the whole situation. But I guess at the same time you could be like, yeah, but the fact of the matter is there's a sweetness into it, like that he kind of described before, that the fact of the matter is no matter what Earth he goes to, he always finds her because she is the love of his life, just no matter what Earth she's from, So there's a sweetness to it, but it's just kind of when you really think about it, it's kind of messed up in a way. I mean, ultimately, he ended up, taking her to try and get the cure. I'll talk about that storyline soon enough. But I thought it was kind of fascinating. Obviously, she didn't want to give up her abilities because being a metahuman is kind of part of who she is, and she doesn't want to let fear control her. And so to protect her, he sends her to a different Earth, which immediately my brain goes, yeah, that's not going to go well for you, because she doesn't know about the fact is that you've married other versions of her across the world, and obviously things between you and her are good, but then it's going to be a whole thing of yeah, we've already seen how his ex-wives act towards him. That episode was really interesting, so it's going to be interesting. I'm wondering, is she going to end up on an Earth that has another Renee or not? Is she going to cross paths with them? I kind of feel like that seems like that might be something that happens, which is going to complicate things for Sherlock, but maybe it's not going to be that case. It's also interesting too because obviously they're going with the whole Irene Adler and kind of Sherlock Holmes type of situation. Obviously that's what they're going for. Well, I don't know if that's typically across the board, but most storylines typically has it being Moriarty being the killer of her. So I guess in this case, maybe Cicada being the respective, Moriarty in this situation. I don't know if that's typically how it goes down in Sherlock Holmes stuff. I feel like that's typically how it does, but we'll ultimately have to, wait and see. But that might be something they're potentially setting up. Sherlock, it's like, oh, when it's all said and done, I'll find you. But it seems like that might be foreshadowing, like things aren't going to work out like that. We'll see. So. But another side of this was the whole conversation of like, if they can get metahumans and turn them back human with this potential cure, granted it is that whole choice thing again, then maybe they can save them before the device could have been activated. And obviously a lot of people show up, and obviously Joe having to take over a lot of responsibilities while Singh is trying to handle all this different stuff, and it's kind of overwhelming Joe because it's a lot of responsibility. He has to handle things as a cop because cops are coming to him about stuff that he should be answering as a captain, and then there's also all these metahumans. It's all becoming a little overwhelming because for him it's like, I usually have Singh as kind of like leverage of like, oh yeah, like in case there's any of this like managerial type of situations and stuff, like people need answers, at the very least I can fall back on him, but now it's kind of on me. But Cecile had to remind him, it's like, how many times have people come to you for answers, whether that be Barry, Iris, Nora, hell, even Ralph have come to you for answers, and they've always relied on you to give it to them straight up, to kind of tell them like it is, because they know who you are, because of that heart of yours always being a moral compass, always pointing in the right direction. As long as you follow that, then you can never lead anyone astray. So I thought that was kind of nice. And when the time comes, like obviously he lets the people know, it's like, yes, I get that you're scared, but if you work a little patience with me, we can get through this together. And I think this might be them setting up potentially Joe taking over the job of, captain. I feel like this might be them leaning towards that, potentially his future. I don't know. It just seems like maybe that's the case. I don't know. It's interesting because you never really see Joe under pressure like that, but it's kind of a stressful situation. I mean, all these people's lives are in danger, so obviously they're freaked out, you're freaked out, so it's an understandable situation. So, but then you have Grace activating the bomb, and now it's turning into a battle of everyone fighting against her, Ralph, Frost, Barry, while Cisco is trying to deactivate the atomizer. And that's so interesting to see things kind of play out like that. It's also interesting, like, had Ralph ever done that before? It kind of reminded me of like some One Piece stuff. Like the fact that he hardened his hand like a blade is like, had he ever done that before? Just because, like, like Luffy's kind of a similar situation, rubber body, being able to like harden it with hockey, that's a whole other nerdy thing. If you're not in One Piece, that will mean absolutely nothing to you, but nevertheless, it just kind of reminded me of that. I was like, had he done that before? That was interesting. So obviously, there's probably a part of Frost that was kind of excited to fight her, just because it's like, yeah, you killed her dad like a few episodes ago, so obviously she's probably intent on taking you down now. Luckily, they were able to stop the atomizer, but obviously, like, she's not going to go down that easy, because even without the dagger, because for her it's like, oh, I didn't have the dagger with me in the future, so it's like the fact of the matter is I've got this, and she ends up kind of still whooping everyone asses just her powers alone. So even without having the dagger to take away their abilities and stuff like that, she's still formidable. But then they do get the dagger away from her, and they're going to use the mirror gun. Now, this is when Ralph kind of pieces everything together, because he's like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, what's this all about? Like, what Eobard's real plan is. Like, if he's planning to do all this, like, what was the whole point of sending Nora back in time to create a different cicada? Which it turns out that this whole situation was about the dagger. And so this in particular has to deal with the dagger being destroyed, and the only means of destroying it is that mirror gun, because it's like, oh, what does that do to it? Where does it send it? It's like, we don't know, we don't really care, as long as it means that it's been taken away from her, then it's all okay. Now, everything I'm saying going forward, it's just kind of me still trying to figure everything out myself. One initial thought is, because obviously we see Eobard has it in the future, so that begs the question, does that mean that he at some point got Orlin's blade? Because once again, I feel like he's the reason why she, because the question's never come up before of like, how did she get to the past? Because the device she used, so it's the same one that, Eobard had, that last time we saw it, he was trying to get back to his own time with. well, the fact of the matter is the argument probably could just be that, oh, she stole it. But it's like, to know where it is, to even know about it like that, especially considering everything about Eobard is kind of locked away, his files and everything. So I chalked that up to being like, hey, like, I've thought for a while she had to have been working with Eobard. And you also had that whole thing with the guard being like, oh, isn't it going to be ironic that the thing that gave you your powers is going to be your death? And so he's getting electrocuted by the energy and stuff like that. But when we see at the end, he has the dagger underneath. So it becomes a question of like, my mind is initially like, oh, so he must have gotten it at some point in time and put it on himself. But then I'm like, why would he be able to put it on himself and the guard's not saying anything? And then immediately hit me in the head of being like, sitting here and like, right. So what's most likely is that they found it to be a means of keeping him under control because it's a dagger that takes away metahumans' ability. So why not use it on one of the most dangerous metahumans, Reverse Flash? And so they've been using that to kind of nullify his powers, and it absorbs energy like that. So that's how they've been electrocuting him. I'm assuming that's how that whole thing works. So part of me, like I said, I'm still kind of piecing this together, but it seems like obviously the whole point is to destroy the dagger. The dagger is the important thing. She didn't have the dagger in the future. The whole point of this whole situation was to create a new scenario where that dagger would be in a position where they'd have no choice but to destroy it in the past. And the way time works, the moment you destroy, like obviously time's going to try and compensate for the fact is, oh, it just doesn't exist in the past, so it's got to be destroyed and disappears in the future, because it puts it in that situation. Because initially my brain was like, the whole point is like when it gets teleported away, it's like, oh, where does it go? It's like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm like, oh, so is that it going to like find its way to Eobard and then the two daggers meet and it causes like a paradox or something like that? I was wondering if that was supposed to be the case, but it's like, no. If it disappears from existence and gets lost present day, that means it won't be there in the future to bind Eobard, so he's able to break free. So that in itself seems like that's what this whole thing was about. It was some long, long con to get free. This, like I said, this is my mindset right now. Like I said, because as I've talked things through, like I've had other thoughts in my head, and it seems like they kind of just got more and more knocked away when I'm sitting here talking about it. So this is my understanding of it. I could be completely wrong. We'd have to wait till the next episode to kind of get their breakdown and understanding of everything that went down. Because like I said, this seems like it's going to be a very complicated plan to unravel, because there's like steps upon steps upon steps, because it seems like, oh, Nora had to play her own part. It seems like Cicada had to play her own part. Maybe, future Eobard had promised her like, oh, like maybe he's like, oh, I'm going to die anyway, so this is my way to help you. All the pain that they put you through with, metahumans, the fact is I can help you get your revenge. So maybe that's the whole thing too. So, which is interesting if that is the case of, like I said, that they purposely are using that against Eobard, but like, why would you do? I mean, I guess because it has a means to an end, and I guess it's like it helps in the end. But like I said, not unless that's something where it's like he has that on him and they just don't know. I mean, it's a clear vest piece right there, so it seems like they purposely know it, that they purposely use that. So it's like, but why would you do that? How would they even come across that weapon, considering the whole Cicada situation? If Cicada was never caught in the future, so it's like, how did you get that weapon? Did Eobard have it on him and then they found out like, oh, it can be used like this? Like, how far back? Because let's not forget, Eobard's been in prison for 15 years, so it's like, did he plan things that far in advance that he's been waiting these past 15 years with this all set in motion? Like, we still don't even know the circumstances in which he got arrested. Did he turn himself in or what? We'll have to wait to see, like I said, the next episode to kind of figure this whole situation out, because it seems like everything's kind of going according to Thawne's plan, because it does seem like at the end they do end up destroying the dagger. Potentially. Everything kind of fades to black before we really get a full picture of what's going on, but still. Next week's episode is the season finale, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about today. Next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.